What happens when a flight attendant slaps the woman she thinks doesn't belong, only to find out she owns the jet and her job? The first thing that struck Danielle Covington as she stepped onto the tarmac in Santa Monica was the heavy scent of jet fuel mixed with the salty ocean air. She pulled her blue blazer tighter around her, the early morning breeze whipping across the private airfield. The Gulfstream G700 gleamed under the rising sun, polished so bright it was almost blinding. It was her plane, her pride, but no one looking at her would guess it. Danielle climbed the short stairway, her low heels tapping neatly against each step. Inside, the cabin was still empty, quiet, the plush leather seats and mahogany panels waiting for their guests. She placed her carry-on near the seat she always preferred, right side, second row. Without thinking, she shrugged off her blazer and draped it over the seat. The flight was supposed to be a routine trip to Dallas, a quick stop for a board meeting, then back to LA by evening. Danielle checked her watch. She was early, as usual. She loved being early. It gave her a chance to breathe before the day swallowed her whole. But that calm didn't last long. A sharp voice snapped from behind her. "Excuse me, who are you and what are you doing here?" Danielle turned slowly. A flight attendant in her 30s, slim with severe blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, marched down the aisle toward her. Her face was twisted with suspicion, her posture stiff like she was bracing for a fight. Danielle kept her voice smooth. "I'm supposed to be here," she said simply, giving the woman a small, polite smile. But the attendant didn't soften. She stopped just a few feet away, arms crossed tight across her chest. "And who exactly said you could board this aircraft?" Danielle blinked. Was this real? "I own the plane," she said calmly, the words coming out in a steady rhythm. The attendant's laugh was sharp, almost like a bark. "Yeah, sure you do," she said. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave, right now." For a long second, Danielle didn't move. She just looked at the woman, trying to decide if she was being pranked. But the look in the attendant's eyes wasn't playful. It was hard. It was real. Danielle took a small step forward, her voice still even. "I'm Danielle Covington. I own Covington Aviation. This is my jet." There was a beat of silence, heavy and awkward, but it didn't break the woman's resolve. If anything, she seemed to dig her heels in deeper, like she didn't even hear the words, or refused to believe them. "You need to leave," the attendant said again, this time sharper, louder, cutting through the cabin like a knife. Danielle felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She wasn't going to raise her voice. She wasn't going to create a scene. That wasn't how she handled herself. Not here, not anywhere. But before Danielle could say another word, the woman reached out and grabbed her by the arm. And that's when things went from uncomfortable to downright dangerous. Danielle instinctively pulled her arm back, her movements sharp but controlled. "Let go of me," she said, her voice dropping a few degrees colder. Still no shouting, no panic, just a firm, clear warning. But Melinda, the flight attendant, didn't back off. Instead, she took a step closer, her face tight with disbelief and something uglier underneath. "You think you can just stroll onto private property and lie your way into a free flight?" she hissed. "I don't know what scam you're running, but not today." Danielle squared her shoulders, staring at her dead in the eyes. "I'm not running a scam," she said. "I'm the reason this plane exists. You don't know who you're talking to." Around them, the engines on the runway outside coughed to life, distant and rumbling. Inside the cabin, though, it felt like the whole world shrank down to just the two of them. A standoff hanging in the thick, heavy air. For a moment, Danielle thought maybe the woman would finally listen. Maybe realize she was making a mistake. But instead, Melinda's eyes flickered over Danielle's jeans, her simple shoes, the blue blazer draped casually over the seat, and her expression hardened even more. In her mind, Danielle didn't look like a billionaire. She didn't fit the picture Melinda had painted in her head, of polished white businessmen or older gentlemen with pressed suits and Rolex watches. Danielle could see it all happening behind her eyes, like watching a bad movie you already knew the ending to. She tried one more time, slower. "Get the captain," Danielle said. "Get—" But she didn't get to finish the sentence. In a flash of pure, reckless anger, Melinda raised her hand and slapped her. The sound cracked through the cabin, sharp, brutal, echoing off the polished walls and leather seats. Danielle didn't stumble. She didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch. She just stood there, one hand slowly coming up to touch her cheek, as her brown eyes locked onto Melinda's with a cold, terrifying calm. For the first time, Melinda seemed to realize she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Passengers had started trickling onto the plane behind them, bags in hand, chattering in low voices, but they stopped dead when they saw the scene frozen in front of them. You could almost hear a pin drop. One man, a tech executive from Phoenix, dropped his coffee cup. It hit the carpet with a soft thud, steaming coffee leaking into the fibers. Another woman, a real estate investor from Scottsdale, gasped audibly and pulled her son behind her like a human shield. Everyone stared at Danielle, not with suspicion, but with something closer to horror. But this wasn't over, not even close. Danielle let the moment stretch, letting every second pull tighter around them like a rubber band about to snap. Her cheek still burned, but she didn't touch it again. She didn't give Melinda the satisfaction of seeing her react. Instead, she calmly bent down, picked up her blazer from the seat, and brushed a piece of invisible lint from the sleeve. Melinda, meanwhile, looked like she was realizing, a little too late, that she might have made the biggest mistake of her career. "I'm calling security," she stammered, pulling a small radio from her waistband with shaky hands. "You're trespassing." Danielle slowly slid her arm into the blazer's sleeve, then the other, taking her time, moving with deliberate control. "Please," she said quietly. "Do. Call them." Several of the new passengers exchanged nervous glances. A few backed toward the door, unsure if they should stay or go. Nobody dared to intervene yet. It was like everyone was waiting to see who would throw the next match into the powder keg. From the front of the plane, the captain, a tall man with dark skin and silver at his temples, finally stepped out of the cockpit, frowning deeply. His name was Captain Roland Gates, and he'd flown for Covington Aviation for nearly 6 years. He recognized Danielle immediately. His eyes widened, then hardened. "Miss Covington," he said, voice loud enough to cut through the tension. "Is everything all right?" Melinda whirled around, staring at the captain like he'd spoken another language. "Miss Covington?" she repeated dumbly. "She's Miss Covington?" Danielle didn't answer her. She kept her eyes on Captain Gates, giving a small nod. "Captain," she said, "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding." Captain Gates strode forward, his body language tense but respectful. "I'm very sorry, ma'am," he said, throwing a sharp glance at Melinda. "We'll handle this immediately." Melinda's face drained of color. She looked around wildly, as if searching for a way out, as if maybe, somehow, this could still be salvaged. You're not serious," she said, voice cracking. "This woman said she owns the plane." Danielle finally turned her full attention back to her. "I don't just own the plane," Danielle said, her voice smooth as glass. "I own the company, Covington Aviation Group, this jet, this flight, every employee on it." She let that hang there, let Melinda's world tilt and spin while the rest of the cabin hung onto every word. But humiliation was only the beginning. What came next was even worse. Melinda stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her radio dangling from her fingers. You could almost hear the gears grinding inside her head as the reality of the situation slammed into her. Passengers started whispering, low and furious. A man near the exit shook his head in disgust. Someone else pulled out their phone, the lens pointed straight at Melinda, ready to capture whatever meltdown might come next. Captain Gates stepped closer, dropping his voice low enough for only Danielle and Melinda to hear. "You need to apologize," he said firmly. "Immediately." Melinda's eyes darted from the captain to Danielle and back again. An apology? After what she had done? After slapping a woman who had every right to be here? Who literally owned everything within reach? For a second, it looked like Melinda might actually try to argue. Her body tensed, her jaw clenched so tight it seemed it might crack. But then something inside her seemed to deflate. Her shoulders sagged, her face flushed a deep, shameful red. She stammered. "I'm sorry." It was weak, hollow, an apology without weight. Danielle stared at her, unmoving. She wasn't interested in hearing a rehearsed line. She didn't want a show for the passengers. She wanted Melinda to feel it, to understand that her snap judgment, her prejudice, her disrespect, didn't just bruise Danielle's pride. It revealed a sickness that ran deeper. Danielle slowly reached into the inside pocket of her blue blazer. Without a word, she pulled out a small, heavy business card, black, trimmed in gold foil, minimalist and powerful. She placed it neatly on the nearest tray table between them, like a dropped gauntlet. It read, in sharp, clean letters, Danielle Covington, CEO and founder, Covington Aviation Group. Melinda stared at it like it was a live wire. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. She stepped back instinctively, bumping into a seat and gripping it for balance. Captain Gates turned to Danielle. Would you like her removed from the flight, Miss Covington? Danielle didn't answer right away. She looked around, at the silent, wide-eyed passengers, at the staff clustered nervously near the cockpit door, and finally back at Melinda, who stood small and trembling like a child waiting for punishment. She could have destroyed her, publicly, fired her on the spot, filed charges, made sure Melinda never worked in aviation again. But Danielle wasn't here to destroy. She was here to teach. No, Danielle said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. She'll stay. The entire cabin seemed to exhale all at once, a long, shaky breath no one realized they'd been holding. Melinda looked up, confused, shocked, almost grateful. But Danielle wasn't finished yet. You're going to serve me, Danielle said simply. With respect, with care, just like you should have from the beginning. Let's see if you can learn something today. And if Melinda thought the worst was over, she was wrong. It was just starting. The silence inside the jet stretched on, broken only by the gentle whine of the engines powering up for taxi. Melinda nodded stiffly, swallowing hard, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles turned pale. She took a step back, adjusting her uniform jacket, trying to reassemble herself piece by piece. Danielle settled into her seat, like she had all the time in the world. She crossed one leg over the other and stared out the window, ignoring the growing heat in the room around her. It was the longest boarding process anyone on that plane had ever witnessed. Each new passenger who came aboard shot Melinda a questioning look. Some whispered behind hands, some shook their heads openly. A few whispered, "That's her," motioning toward Danielle with wide eyes. Melinda forced herself to go through the motions, smiling stiffly, offering drinks with a tight throat, moving like a puppet whose strings were tangled. Every time she glanced at Danielle, she was reminded, not by words, but by presence alone, that she had misjudged someone who held more power than she could even comprehend. As the plane took off over the bright California coastline, Danielle leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, feeling the subtle pull of gravity fall away. She didn't need to speak. The lesson was happening without her lifting a finger. 2 hours into the flight, Melinda approached Danielle's seat, hands nervously smoothing the hem of her jacket. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" she asked, her voice low, almost trembling. Danielle opened her eyes slowly. "Water," she said. "Room temperature, no ice." "Of course," Melinda nodded, rushing to fulfill the simple order like her life depended on it. Passengers watched out of the corners of their eyes, pretending to read magazines or check emails, but no one missed the shift in energy. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just about a drink, it was about respect, and how easily it could be given or taken away based on nothing but assumption. When Melinda returned, hands steady but tense, she placed the glass on the table with both hands, careful not to spill a drop. Danielle looked at the glass, then up at her. "Thank you," Danielle said. It was simple, polite, but coming from Danielle, it felt like a mountain being lifted. Melinda stepped back, nodding once before returning to her station like a soldier dismissed. The rest of the flight passed in a strange kind of quiet. No arguments, no shouting, just the heavy weight of consequences settling over everyone like a thick blanket. But the real reckoning was waiting for them when they landed. When the wheels touched down at Dallas Love Field, the plane rolled to a smooth stop on the private terminal runway. The sun was climbing higher now, casting long, sharp shadows across the tarmac. The air inside the cabin felt thick, almost heavier than the humid Texas air waiting outside. Captain Gates made the usual announcement over the intercom, thanking the passengers for flying with Covington Aviation, but his voice carried an edge this time, a little sharper, a little more careful. As passengers gathered their belongings, a man in a navy suit and dark sunglasses stood near the door. He wasn't another pilot or a flight attendant. He was from corporate. Danielle's corporate. Melinda spotted him instantly and paled even further, if that was possible. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp on her service apron. Her breathing turned shallow. The man in the suit didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His presence alone made it clear that the situation had been reported and that it was now far bigger than a slap, a misunderstanding, or a heated mistake at 30,000 feet. Danielle waited until everyone else had disembarked. She wasn't in a rush. She never rushed. She gathered her bag, stood up slowly, smoothed her blue blazer, and walked to the front of the plane where Melinda and the suited man stood. For a second, Melinda looked like she might drop to her knees, plead, beg, anything to fix what she broke. Danielle didn't give her the satisfaction. "People will forget what you said," Danielle said quietly, voice calm, low, almost tender. "They'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel." Melinda's lips quivered, her eyes glassy. "You made me feel invisible," Danielle continued, "like I didn't belong in a space I built with my own hands, like I had to prove my worth just to sit down." The suited man watched, silent but respectful, letting Danielle have her moment. "And that," Danielle said, stepping closer, "will cost you far more than this job." Melinda's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and she grabbed the doorframe for support. Danielle didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She didn't have to. She turned and stepped off the plane into the Texas sun, the world wide open in front of her, while behind her, Melinda was left standing in the wreckage of her own making. Passengers still milling around the terminal looked up as Danielle passed. Some nodded respectfully. A few whispered her name under their breath, not as a scandal, but as a quiet kind of admiration. Danielle adjusted her sunglasses, hoisted her carry-on, and kept walking, her heels clicking against the polished floor with every confident step. But the most important part of the journey wasn't the flight. It was the message left hanging in the air for everyone who watched it happen. Outside the private terminal, Danielle's driver, a tall woman with tightly coiled hair and a sharp navy suit, was waiting by the black town car. Danielle handed off her bag, exhaled slowly, and slid into the back seat, closing the door softly behind her. As they pulled away from the airport, Danielle leaned her head against the cool window, watching the runways fall away into the distance. Her cheeks still ached faintly where the slap had landed, but that wasn't what stuck with her. What stuck was the bigger picture. How easily people decided who deserved respect and who didn't. How quickly they wrote you off, measured by your clothes, your skin, the stories they carried in their heads before you ever opened your mouth. And how, sometimes, the best revenge wasn't raising your voice. It was staying seated, calm, unshaken. In the rearview mirror, the driver glanced back at her. "You good, ma'am?" Danielle smiled faintly. "I'm good," she said. "Some lessons just cost more than others." They drove through the busy Dallas streets, past glass skyscrapers and local diners, past construction crews and street musicians, past everyday people rushing through their own complicated days. People who might be judged, underestimated, overlooked, every single hour of their lives. Danielle knew her story wouldn't be the last. She knew there were 1,000 other planes, offices, boardrooms, street corners where someone else would have to remind the world that appearances don't define worth. But today, in her own way, she had drawn a line. As the town car disappeared into traffic, the words she carried inside herself stayed strong. Never shrink to fit into someone else's narrow view. Make them widen their eyes. Make them adjust. Because real power doesn't need to announce itself. It speaks loudest in the moments when you stay standing while everyone else stumbles. If you ever find yourself judged before you speak, remember, your worth was never theirs to define. Stand tall, stay calm, and let the truth of who you are do all the talking.